Hey guys, and welcome to the overclocking guide for the ASUS MAXIMUS VII Gen motherboard. We're using a setup with a Intel Core i7-4790K CPU, air-cooled by a Fentex cooler, and two modules of 4GB memory each. And I just entered the BIOS by pressing the delete key. You should end up in the extreme trigger, which you can see here. So we just start with the AI overclock tuner, set this one to manual, to fix the BCIK frequency at 100 MHz. Go down to the CPU core ratio. This one will make sure that all the CPU cores will be clocked at the exact same level. Set this one to, let's say, 42, which is an increase of 200 MHz. The Core i7-4790K has a stock frequency of 4000 MHz. The CPU cache ratio is the uncore or ring, and it's basically a connection inside the CPU connecting all the cores with a cache. And I recommend to fix this one to a 35 because it's not going to help you a lot in performance, but it could cause a lot of instabilities. The internal PLL overvoltage can help the overclocking if you're doing extreme overclocking, but for 24/7 overclocking I recommend to leave this one on auto. We're not going to touch the DRAM frequency now, I will do that in a separate tutorial. Go down to the voltage settings. Make sure fully manually mode is enabled so we have the full access to the voltages. Change the CPU core voltage to the stock value, which seems to be 1.1 volt here. Fix the CPU cache voltages at 1.16. Don't touch the CPU graphics voltage, that's for the iGPU of the CPU, and usually you're not using this one, so don't touch it. And CPU system agent voltage is responsible for memory overclocking. Fix this one on the stock value as well, the same as the analog I/O voltages and the digital I/O voltage. 1 volt here and 1.05 volt here. That's basically all you need for the CPU voltages itself. Now change the initial CPU input voltage. This is basically the voltage delivered from the mainboard to the CPU. It seems to be about 1.7 volt stock for this CPU, 1.68. And change initial and eventual to the same value. You don't have to touch the rest of the voltages, but make sure that the CPU spread spectrum is set to disabled. Now go over to the advanced menu and let's go up first. You will end up in this menu. You can see an overview of your CPU, of the supported features like AVX and other features. Go down here and you will see, for example, hyperthreading, which is giving you an additional 4 threads to the 4 physical ones. Just leave all these settings on default, that's perfectly fine. Go to the CPU power management configuration. Enhanced Intel SpeedStep technology is responsible for clocking down the CPU in idle. I recommend to set this one to disabled. You're not going to save a lot of energy, maybe let's say 2 to 4 watt. But it could cause instabilities if you're clocking very high, so set this one to disabled. Leave turbo mode enabled for ASUS boards and change CPU C states to disabled as well. This one would cause your voltages to drop in idle if you go to Windows. So that's basically it, and press F10 and press enter and see if it boots. Seems perfectly fine, so we can now enter Windows 7. Using the German version, but that shouldn't be an issue. Basically, you need 3 tools. You have to have CoreTemp, Prime95, and CPU-Z. You can download them all on the Overclocking.Guide website in the download section. The CoreTemp feature tool will show the details of the CPU. You can see we have an i7-4790K Haswell clocked at 4.2 GHz. You can see we set about 1.1 volt, and you can see the temperatures of all the cores, about 30 degrees at the moment. open CPU-Z, and you can see it's also 4.2 GHz here. Don't worry about this voltage. Usually it displays the CPU input voltage sometimes for the several BIOS versions. Don't worry if this one is exceeding the value over here, that's normal. You can see the mainboard using ASUS MAXIMUS VII Gen, and the BIOS version is 0028. If you go to memory, we can see the memory is completely on default, and the CPU core or cache is set to 3.5 GHz. Now open Prime 95, change to custom, minimum FFT size to 1344, same to the maximum, and make sure you check FFTs in place. Press OK, and now the tool is putting a lot of load on your CPU to check if it's stable or not. You can see that we have like 100% load on all cores now, and the CPU temperature is about 50 degrees. I recommend to stay below 90 degrees, so at the moment we have a lot of space left in the temperature. I already tested those settings, they are very stable, that's perfectly fine. If you're at the same clocks and the system crashes like a blue screen, don't worry. If you still have a lot of room in temperature, simply go back to BIOS and raise the CPU core voltage. Just make sure that if once you open Prime 95 and start the run, that you're not exceeding 90 degrees. Okay, that's basically it. You can just go back to BIOS if this one is stable and raise the clocks. If it's stable, it's cool. If it's unstable and you have room in temperature, simply raise the core voltage. Okay, thanks for listening. Bye.